Okay, hi. My name's Tare, and I'm one of the facilitators and founders, co-creators of Starsdance Mystery School. And welcome to our 2023 forecast, which we have subtitled Ingress. So I would like yeah, to have Hemlock and Bonnie introduce themselves, but to just give a little bit more background about me. I've been an astrologer since about 96, a professional astrologer, and I've been studying astrology since the 80s. My approach to astrology is both magical and personal. I use myth and psychology and archetype in my astrological practice. And I'm also learning to blend in traditional points of view and techniques into my astrology. I love, I'll just give a little bit about our mystery school. We are queer, we are witches, we blend that intersection of astrology as explaining things to us and explaining ourselves, but also how we can use astrology for our magic. And our magic is got a point of view of changing the world, creating more justice and equity, and so we're on that project as well. So maybe I'll turn this over to Hemlock, and you can introduce yourself and say anything else about the school you'd like to say.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name's Hemlock Shining Coil. I use she and they pronouns. I've been a registrar, co-founder, facilitator of Starsdance since 2020 when we launched. Um, and I love learning about astrology from our students and from our great facilitation team. Um, in my magic and astrology really have to do with embodiment and the living in that present moment with the planets, whatever energy they're bringing. um and then devotional work. We had a really lovely asteroid goddesses class this past year that was really sweet and meaningful. um yeah, I think that's all I want to say about it for now. I'll hand it to Bonnie.
Hi everyone, I'm Bonnie. So I started studying astrology in the very beginning of the pandemic when there was a lot of free time. I primarily have been learning Hellenistic and traditional astrology, although I like to learn all different styles, including modern, evolutionary, and I think they all have different uses and different things they can offer. And so I also am a big fan of electional astrology, which you'll see me talk about soon on Discord. I like to post different timings that we can use, whether it's for magic or just like opportune times for getting things done that you need. I think astrology offers a really great way to do that, to set magical intentions or set intentions for other things in your life and use astrology to help you with that. And I appreciate Stardance Mystery School for how much of like an experimental classroom it is, hearing different perspectives and also just like learning astrology with each other. And I think Hemlock said embodiment. I really like that word too, of just like learning how to embody astrology, which I also do with my dance practice. And I'm also really excited for the houses class. Since I'm a traditional astrologer, I use whole sign houses, but I also like to learn about the other house systems and kind of see what their different pros and cons are. So I'm excited to learn more with y'all. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you.
Check.
Yeah, just to give a little bit more background, Star Sense Mystery School has been, Hemlock, tell me, has it been 3 years or has it been 4 years that we've actually,
3 year It'll be 3 years in March.
mhm,
It
3 years
was
in
Aries season 2020. We officially launched our first class.
right.
So there
And
was brewing before then. So we
yeah,
don't have a
right. And there
birthday.
were classes that were being offered
Yeah.
before that, but then we brought it into a format of a year-long program, and you can access information. We have a website, Stars Dance Mystery School, but also on Patreon is where you sign up. So Starsdance Mystery School on Patreon, and there are different tiers. We also, so we have, self-paced learning on your own, but we also have a Discord classroom where people can talk to each other, ask questions, and I think it's a wonderful way to kind of have astrology community. So
Yeah, it's
it's great.
really active right now in our houses class.
Yeah, we're having a houseless class right now. Queer perspectives on the houses, and it's really been great. So, Hemlock, do you want to talk about, our theme for this year?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about our theme. So our theme this year is ingress. And if you don't know what that word means, we're going to use it a lot. So I'm going to define it. Uh, and ingress means to enter. Um, so we have some big planets, some movers and shakers moving into new signs. So for the past few years, Saturn has been in Aquarius and is moving this year into Pisces. And Pluto for 13-ish years has been in Capricorn and does its first dip into Aquarius this year. Jupiter moves about a sign a year, but it's still going to feel different. So Jupiter will uh, has fully entered. I haven't looked at the chart today. Has fully entered Jupiter perhaps, or will in the next few days. And
All right. Well,
Jupiter,
enter
Aries. Jupiter will enter Aries, not enter itself.
Aries.
And then later in the year, we'll ingress into Taurus. We also have Mars exiting out of Gemini and ingressing back into, direct motion for the year. And we have Venus having a retrograde cycle in the late summer, which will be interesting to say the least. So it's a big year of energetic shifts. I think that Saturn and Pluto are going to be really big shifts for folks. Energetically, it's going to, if you use whole sign house systems, it's moving into a whole new house. Even if you're using Placidus, perhaps it's moving into a new house or a new, at least if nothing else, a new sign. Yeah, I think those are the big things, the big points of why we're calling it Ingress. Last year we did a Mars theme, and we just kind of went through Mars's motion through the year this past year in 2022.
Another ingress that we're having are the nodes. They're going to shift out of the axis. The North Node has been in Taurus, and then the North Node is going to go into Aries. And so it's another, shift. And we're going to talk more about each of these things as we go through tonight. So thanks. So one of the things I think is really important to think about the future is to kind of look at the past, and it gives us a place to start in looking at, well, how will it be different when all these planets go into these new signs? So I just want to spend some time talking about what we noticed and what stood out for us in 2022. What were the big themes, and how did it feel? One of the things that I noticed, and one of the major things, and the reason that we framed our last year's forecast with Mars, is that Mars has been moving retrograde in Gemini. And that meant that Mars, instead of going through a sign for 6 weeks per sign, is like 7 months in a sign, 7 months in Gemini. And I am wondering, this influence started in August when Mars went into Gemini. And then in October, it stationed retrograde. And then we had this kind of amazing full moon recently in December, where the full moon was conjunct this retrograde Mars exactly. And so I'm wondering if, anyone wants to talk about this, because we're not done with this Mars retrograde, but it's certainly a big part of what we're bringing into the next year and what will change when it's finally over.
So I think for me, my first time really thinking about Mars retrograde was in 2020 when we had that Mars retrograde in Aries,
Mhm.
and that felt grueling. It was just hot, cranky energy for forever. And this one has felt much more fluid to me, um, and less heated. I mean, it's an air sign and it's mutable, so it's that, that back and forth energy, um, or that mixed energy. So for me, Mars being in Gemini has been a lot of like, consider the weight of your words. Um, yeah, I think that, I mean, I'm sitting with that now of like, what is the weight of these words in this moment too. Yeah, and being able to shift and adjust where I'm directing my will, and pull back and slow down in a lot of ways.
Mm, mm,
And I think too about that, um with the sun being in Sagittarius, of the archer drawing back the bow, of it, if Mars is drawing back that bow in Gemini, to be able to propel forward into those thoughts and ideas that are brewing and have weightiness now, how they can move
mhm.
state, when it's moving forward again.
Right. Yeah. Have you noticed anything, Bonnie? Has anything stood out for you about Mars retrograde?
Yes, but it also includes Venus. So for 2022, I was reflecting on whenever Venus was in Sagittarius, I was reflecting on like Venus and Sagittarius opposing Mars retrograde in Gemini, and how in the beginning of the year, we started with a Venus retrograde in Capricorn, which I really felt, and then Venus entered Aquarius and was conjunct Mars in Aquarius. So we started the year off with Venus and Mars together, and then towards the end of the year, with that Mars retrograde, we had Venus opposing Mars. So I think it's really interesting that it started out the year with them conjunct and ended with them opposing during that retrograde. And it makes me, yeah, just like reflecting on like how our desires and like um, how our relationships are shifting and changing with that, and what Venus like is saying to Mars during this time. I think that's something really, really interesting about this year.
Hmm, that's an interesting thing. I hadn't noticed that. Yeah, for me, I have really been noticing the kind of an agitation and anxiety that Mars and Gemini has sort of elevated for me. There's with a retrograde, there's both this like, oh, I'm going to take a back seat, but also a frustration that I can't move forward because I want people to move with my Mars energy. So it's just both of those things that kind of like, and so I think Mars retrograde can be a time of frustration because things that we want to just go forward and get accomplished have a way to have a need to reconsider, slow down, think it through. um, so yeah, I think this last full moon, which was also the midpoint of the Mars retrograde, it kind of was a release of some of the tension. And I would think that as we go forward, it's just going to start to make more sense what we've been going through. Less frustration and more meaning maybe is coming from it. Yeah. But I think if anyone is feeling a little bit more anxiety or more frustration, that we're going to look for the timings of when Mars is making some moves to see that shifting and changing, which will be great. Um, so, like you said, Hemlock, one of the things that's going to happen is that Saturn is going to go into Pisces in March. So, for the last 3-ish years, Saturn has been in Aquarius, and I wonder if we have anything to reflect about that. Like, what has the experience of the last 3-ish years, which have just been a delight, I'm sure. We can all remember that. Um, what is Saturn about? Saturn, for me, I like to think about Saturn as the planet that kind of presents a lot of obstacles, burdens, responsibility, but has a way of turning our focus to something really meaningful, important, things we really need to acquire, learn about, um, get, do work around. One of my words for Saturn is work. So, what are you noticing about how what we learned from Aquarius?
Yeah, I can go first as an Aquarius moon and rising, and as Saturn is getting ready to
Wow.
roll on over those particular points in my chart.
Mhm.
Um, for me, I really see Saturn as that great boundary maker. Bonnie often calls Saturn Sky Daddy, which I kind of love. Like I use that affectionately when I'm doing Saturn work of like, okay, Dad, let's like Sky Dad, let's where do you what is unattainable, like what is not tenable and what is not sustainable. And for me, when I think about Aquarius so much, I think about that visionary, community driven thing.
Mhm.
And I think too, like with the pandemic and being at home, Saturn said, like, gave at least me and I think other people the opportunity to go like, oh, like maybe I'm actually an introvert. Maybe I actually enjoy less on my plate. Maybe, like for me, it looked a lot like evaluating what I needed in community and what community looked like for me.
Mm.
Um, and I think maybe for a lot of people, I mean, I know I don't want to minimize like the fact that like many people really suffered through the pandemic, especially during lockdowns that were awful. Um, but I think that there's a piece of Saturn that says it was awful because it was an untenable situation. How can we make this tenable? How can we strengthen our our boundaries and our resolve through things? Saturn's my chart ruler, so I am really trying to be friends um, with the harder pieces of life that Saturn brings, and those looking at challenges as opportunities. Yeah,
Mm. Mhm.
yeah, but it'll be interesting. It's going to be, Saturn's been in a Saturn ruled sign for almost 6 years, um, and won't be back in a Saturn ruled sign for what, 25 or so. Um, so it's going to be a shift of, into some fluidity, out of fixed air and out of earth signs and into some fluidity. And what do boundaries and tenable situations look like, untenable situations look like
Mhm.
when they're fluid?
Mhm.
Fluid in two ways. Mutable water.
Yeah. What do you think, Bonnie, about Saturn and Aquarius?
Yeah, I love what you said, Hemlock. And I'm also thinking about, yeah, Saturn as being the planet of tough love. And I think part of this is that I'm also thinking of Uranus and Taurus, because that's been a big theme with Saturn and Aquarius, is that we've had those direct squares, and now the squares are kind of lessening and they're moving away from each other. But we've had those areas of tension. I think Saturn and Aquarius and also Uranus and Taurus have been trying to show us what we've been doing that just isn't going to work anymore. Like what we're trying to, bring. There are things that we're trying to bring back post pandemic that didn't really work before the pandemic, and they certainly don't work now. But I think Saturn and Aquarius is like trying to show us like what are some of these things that just need to radically change because they're not sustainable. They're not sustainable boundaries. They're not sustainable structures. And like, how can we envision something that's more innovative for community and for community care?
Yeah. Community is a big theme. And also communities. Like I'm noticing under the Saturn and Aquarius that people have said this a lot. We're more polarized. There are different groups that have sort of like developed walls around them that don't seem to be communicating with each other as much. And lots of different worldviews that are sort of like isolating and clashing. And, I think this is setting us up for when Pluto goes into Aquarius. So there's just like this, like Saturn has laid, so I see Saturn as how laying out some of our dysfunction. And also, but also on the other hand, there has been a lot of, Aquarius is a really technological, science-oriented sign. We had the vaccinations were created under for COVID were created under Saturn in Aquarius, and a lot of science breakthroughs have happened this year. Um, and so it's kind of like a mixed bag with Saturn and Aquarius, I think. Back in 2020, Saturn and Jupiter when Saturn went into Aquarius for the first time, or actually the second time in December of 2020, was when Jupiter and Saturn came together in the great conjunction of Aquarius. And so that's also another part of the cycle that we're in with Saturn and Aquarius. But the other big cycle and the big planet that we want to notice is Pluto has been in Capricorn for since 2008 when it
Little planet,
yeah,
big influence.
when it entered Capricorn was when we had that
Great recession.
crisis of the stock market and housing, finance, and like restructuring banks, and just a big financial crisis. And Capricorn kind of governs those kind of things. Our hierarchies, our organizations, our foundations, our governments. And so we've had Pluto going through Capricorn. Pluto has that function of showing the shadow, showing the toxicity that's present, and giving us an opportunity to metabolize and transform and change that. So what do you want to say about Capricorn, Pluto and Capricorn? Like
So
it's.
I think one thing that's pinging right now for me is that the internet just had its Saturn return, because the internet is
Mhm,
has a Saturn in Aquarius, and
mhm,
how interesting it is that we've seen some social networks crumbling. Um, and we don't have to go into the details of that. There are plenty of podcasts that if you want details about that, you can go listen. But I think it's interesting with like the tech of Saturn going, like kind of like kicking the tires a little bit of the internet, and going, Pluto's coming. Like, are you actually ready for the next 20 years? Because Pluto slows down um, this half of the zodiac. Once they hit Aquarius, they slow down a lot more and spend a lot more time in each sign because of their highly elliptical orbit. Um, but I think for me, like thinking about Pluto and Capricorn, of thinking about what are the institutional structures, um, if we think about like the Pluto return of the United States, like Pluto came in and was like not tire kicking, it was revolution. And then we're having that Pluto return now of, okay, what isn't working in this democracy experiment that the United States has been doing for 250 years.
mhm,
So I think that's a piece. I think there's a piece about power um in Pluto and Capricorn that I still think will come up with Pluto and Aquarius, but it will feel and look very different. I think it'll be less about like power of the land and the like the holdings that you have, and the power of ideas and
mhm,
the influence of them.
mhm,
Um, yeah, I think that we'll get that those first tastes this year.
mhm. Right.
Funny. Bonnie.
What do you got?
Yeah, it'll be fun because yeah, Pluto is going from my first house, I think, to your first house in whole sign Hemlock.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm reflecting on how I feel like Pluto, because they're both Saturn ruled signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, but with Capricorn, there's more of a physical element as an earth sign. And it makes me think of like tearing down the floorboards because they're rotting. And like you said, Hemlock, more about like physical things, whereas Aquarius is more about ideas and technology. So I wonder if there's going to be a shift in not just, you know, talking about like what isn't sustainable like physically, but also like ideas that aren't sustainable, like what in technology we have that's like not working for everyone, and really grappling with like the power dynamics of that, which I'm really interested to see because I'm sure it'll look very different from Pluto and Capricorn. And for me personally, I was reflecting on Pluto and Capricorn and how for me in my first house, I feel like it's been like a time of reflecting on fear in my body because it's my first house. And then once I've gotten over that fear, it's like turned into empowerment. So I really think that, yeah, if we work with Pluto in that way, where we're facing our fears, we can turn it into power, but you have to do the hard work of like facing those shadows and fears.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to transition into next year. How's that
Okay,
sound?
that sounds
This
great.
this
You
sort
don't want
of
to talk about the eclipses?
excuse me.
Do you want to talk at all about the eclipses, or
I
you
think
want
they'll come up when
to?
we do an overview, but just this
Okay.
Pluto theme, we've kind of set the stage for what Pluto and Capricorn has been. And actually, one of the things that the US has experienced while Pluto right this last year was a US Pluto return. And so the last time that Pluto was in Capricorn was in 1776, or yeah, that last time was when, you know, the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution began. When Pluto went into Aquarius the last time was that period between 1778 to 1798. That was when the Constitution was created. That was when the government got established. And there was also in that period of time a lot of humanism, what we call the Age of Enlightenment, all these lofty ideals about democracy and how the collective could organize itself. And so we're gonna start to, I think, have these themes repeat. Like, how do we reorganize ourselves? Can we, you know, make a more perfect union? That feels like such an Aquarius ideal, but as we know, in just in the history of the US, there was a lot of, it was based on colonization, it was based on genocide, it was based on enslavement. And so we want to detoxify some ideal, and this will be a time where I feel like we get to do a redo in our country. And this is actually, now the US is old enough to actually have a whole Pluto cycle behind us so that we kind of can look at these things and see ourselves in a maybe a more mature way, or maybe a more powerful way, if we can accept our own shadows and move beyond the things that have been part of our history. Any thoughts about, you know, what you think this Pluto and Aquarius is gonna be like?
I am hopeful that we get some um what is the I something about accessibility. Like if Aquarius is technology, can Pluto show the shadows where technology is not useful, but also where we're not utilizing it like usefully, right? Like how can we make things more accessible? How can we bring more people into the conversation on tech? And I think, you know, the pandemic gave us an opportunity to show that work can be done from home, and we can have work that is accessible to people who need to work from home for one reason or another. And I think that there's going to be, I hope that there is an accessible revolution of some kind that Pluto can bring. And maybe we get a taste of that, those first few degrees of Aquarius, a taste of that technology coming into its fullness a little bit, or testing that technology so that it can come into its fullness.
Mm-hmm. You got any thoughts about this?
I'm hoping that it will bring us more conversation around access to information, like what kind of information we as everyday people should know about, what we don't know about. And with Pluto and any other kind of transit, I always feel like there's like this big opportunity with each transit of like, if we do our homework, this is what we'll learn. But there's always the other side of like, if we get this, we're going to see more of the shadow of that. We're going to see more of the fear. So I'm hoping, like I say this with every transit, I'm hoping that we embrace like whatever it is, like the fear, and use that to radically change something, because that's what Pluto wants us to do.
Right. So just to give some dates, March is when Pluto goes into 0 degrees Aquarius. And then it's going to station retrograde and go back into Capricorn. And it's actually going to go back and forth between Capricorn and Aquarius until 2025. So 2024 is really this back and forth year for Pluto. And then Pluto will be in Aquarius until 2042. So we got a long period of time where, just like you say, there's the shadows and the fears are definitely going to be present. I remember when Pluto went into Capricorn and then, that financial crisis, it was really sudden. And so I'm wondering if there's going to just be a sudden shift or a sudden urgency to look at some of the ways we've relied, just all the themes we've relied on technology, the ways that we have wanted to organize ourselves in a governmental way. I also am thinking about how Saturn was in Aquarius and how we have become polarized into, what we might want to call tribes, or just these ways that we're looking only towards each other if we're in agreement. And there'll be some sort of crisis that forces us to turn out again, and how that will feel. I listened to a
The
podcast.
social media echo chambers.
Yeah, social media echo chambers. I've been really learning from a teacher named Loretta Ross, who is teaching, anti-racism point of view, and how we've been calling each other out and canceling each other, and how that has reached a dead end. And this is part of it, I think. And I think the Saturn in Pisces is going to get us more into that compassionate embrace of each other. But this Pluto in Aquarius is just kind of like reaching the end of the rope, maybe, with how we've polarized. I don't know. But we have a long time for Pluto to be in this sign. So it's not going to be just overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus all the other planets going to be transiting and conjoining Pluto over the next 20 years.
Yes, right.
Yeah. And we'll get another, in about 18 or so years, another Jupiter Saturn conjunction in an air sign.
Yeah.
Trining, and that'll be interesting as well, to that Pluto.
Right. We're in the age of air, and Aquarius being an air sign, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, big cycles.
Right. So that's a big cycle, a smaller but big cycle as well. As we've talked about how Saturn is going to go into Pisces. Yeah, so Hemlock, you talked about how that will be a really big shift, because Saturn has been in its own signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, for the last 6 years. Now it's going to leave that comfort zone where it's been pretty stern. We've been going through a lot of times of austerity, a lot of times of um, reality check, which is Saturn's forte. What do you think Saturn going into Pluto is going to, I mean, Pisces is going to be like? What's going to be
So
important?
many words.
Yeah.
Oh, what do I think Saturn going to Pisces? I'm curious, um, because I'm not sure. Saturn was like last in Pisces in the early 90s, right? And that felt like that was all like that was the internet was like suddenly. I remember like my parents doing their first emails like in the early 90s, and things felt very hopeful in a lot of ways. We were internet like 2.0 at that point, maybe. But it was early internet. Message boards were just starting to come online. Um, I think, um, yeah, it's gonna
When
feel.
I looked, it was from 93 to 96. I kind of looked up some headlines. It's when Bill Clinton was president. There was a great flood of the Mississippi River. Amazon was founded by Jeff Bezos when Saturn was in Pluto. It's interesting.
Saturn is in Pisces.
There was a lot. There was several domestic terrorist attacks, the Unabomber, the Oklahoma City bombing, and then the O.J. Simpson trial, which are all really important, events for this country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Pisces can be a sign about like sacrifice or like for the greater good. So
Right.
what are people doing with that?
Right. What are the ideals? I would think too about like on a personal level, like Pisces about that spirituality and belief systems, and is Saturn going to test those, belief systems and spiritualities? Like,
Mhm.
is it working for you, kind of thing?
Mm.
I think on a very personal level.
Mhm.
Um, where's Pisces in your chart? What do you believe about that thing?
Yeah.
Saturn's gonna roll through and, you know, open up the engine into a full state inspection and emissions test on it. I'm on a car thing apparently tonight.
Yeah. I
You
think,
might need new brakes and rotors in that area.
yeah. Think about the difference between Aquarius and Pisces. Aquarius
Mhm.
being a more mental way, how do we organize ourselves as a collective and a community? And Pisces being, how do we break down the barriers between us through our hearts and compassion and a sense of oneness. And I think that Saturn might be leading the way into Pisces to help us get organized about that rather than just having poor boundaries or getting confused that this is actually a skill we need to build connection. Gets back to how Loretta Ross is teaching about calling each other in. How
Mhm.
do we break down the barriers and how do we actually recognize that we're more alike or need each other more than we have thought in the past?
I really love that.
Do you have anything about Saturn and Pisces?
Yeah, I think I love what you said about like how we're communicating and how we're feeling together. Compassion is a big Pisces ideal, and I'm just like it kind of breaks my brain to think of Saturn and Pisces because it seems like very paradoxical. But now I'm starting to understand more that it's still Saturn and Saturn wants boundaries, but in a sign like Pisces, it just feels really different, and it makes me wonder if we're going to start to be more like in touch with how certain boundaries we've set in Saturn and Capricorn and Aquarius don't feel right anymore, and like maybe are inhibiting connection, and basically like how we're changing the way we have boundaries and like categories and labels, and like how we're shifting them to like feel more like close to others. So in a way it's like Like it's still Saturn. It's still going to be about setting boundaries, but doing that through a way that's more guided by empathy and compassion.
Right.
And it's going to be co-present with Neptune. So I think it's going to feel like a lot of dissolve. Like Neptune could be there to help dissolve something. Like I feel like maybe Saturn goes, this needs dissolved. This needs dissolved. And Pluto's like, psst, psst, like fizzle it up like a little Alka-Seltzer.
Oh, okay. So there's dissolving in the water and then the bubbles of
Yeah.
the
I was imagining bubbles too, because they are boundaries. They're very watery and like kind of flimsy, but yeah, I was just imagining like kind of like labels and like Pisces, Saturn and Pisces, like moving them around because it's a fluid, movable sign. But it's like, okay, this boundary is going to shift this way. So it's just a little bit less rigid, but there's still like this shifting of boundaries.
Yeah, we're going to have new relationship to boundaries and structures for sure. Um, that is true.
And more improvisation, like doing it more like in the flow and how it feels, and less like it has to be done exactly at this time.
Yeah, I think too, thinking back about the past few years, like with Saturn and Capricorn, it was like, these are the structures that we must follow. Like these rules will keep us safe. And then it was Saturn and Aquarius was felt like a lot of like overthinking. Like, okay, is this actually going to work? Da, 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 da. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Like, so it may
Yeah.
have been a little bit of that. I really like that idea of it kind of being like, well, let's try it. Let's see.
Let's experiment. And
Yeah.
also, yeah, Saturn and Aquarius probably also felt like with Uranus and Taurus, like in the squares, like
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot more tension as we're overthinking those things. So our brains are probably a bit fried too.
Our brains are fried. And it kind of gets me back to Mars has been retrograding in an air sign, Gemini, and it is going to stop. It's going to leave Gemini the same month that Pluto enters Aquarius and Saturn enters Pisces. We're talking about March. March is like this, like we're looking forward to March
Nexus
right now.
point.
Yeah. So Jupiter is another energy. We've had Jupiter in Pisces this year off and on, and for the last since was it the end of October? When was Jupiter went into Pisces for its last time?
I have that written down somewhere.
And it just tomorrow is going to leave Pisces and go into Aries, where it's going to be until May. So this is another ingress that we're actually in that process right now, and then it's just gonna zoom through Aries in 5 months, and then it's going to be in Taurus for the rest of 2023, and actually we'll leave Taurus in May of 2024. So we got a long period of time. So we've been in Pisces with Jupiter ruling Pisces. What do you think it will feel like to have Jupiter going into this the cardinal fire sign Aries for the next 5 months? How is that going to like get us going with all these changes?
We had a little taste of that this past year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was really overshadowed by the squares with Uranus and Saturn. And so I'm interested to see Jupiter fully in Aries and being able to say, like, this is what I want you to put energy towards starting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll be interesting. I think it'll be interesting too to have such a long period in Taurus then, of going from where are you putting your will to where are you putting your desires. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we grow? The great expander will expand.
Mm-hmm.
Bonnie?
Yeah, I love that. I'm thinking about how with this Mars retrograde in Gemini and the frustration building with that retrograde energy, how when Jupiter enters Aries, there's going to be this like just do it energy, this like kind of push to like move forward and get things done. But since Mars is still retrograde in Gemini, there might be some like fumbling around in the very beginning, but then eventually we'll like find our footing and have some more energy and initiative to move forward after spending a lot of time feeling kind of stuck and going back and forth, back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then with Jupiter and Taurus, I'm really curious like what that will bring up, since Uranus has been in Taurus for quite some time, and how and also with like the Saturn and Uranus square lessening, like how are we going to gain some traction in some of those Taurus themes? Also with like the North Node, like what it's been showing us in Taurus. It makes me think of like, you know, very physical things, of course, like climate change and like labor organizing, like maybe there'll be some progress after all of the like struggling around in those like physical things.
I
Hmm.
think I just want to add, if I can, for a moment, that like, oh, I wrote it down. Why did I write this down? Oh, Mercury retrograde. So Jupiter, you know, we have Mars retrograde, Jupiter's moving into Aries, but Mercury is going to station retrograde, and it's that fumbling is going to happen until I think both of those two are direct. I think that it's going to be like, please let me get started, and it's not going to
Yeah.
not actually going to turn over. That car's not going to turn over until Mercury.
Yeah. Yeah, Jupiter in Aries is going to make us feel like, yes, I can finally get stuff done. And then there's like all this like fumbling around, or the car's not starting exactly. It's like there's progress, but there's like this stumbling around. So I think
Found my keys. Why
yes.
won't it
Yeah, it's like, I'm ready. And it's like, no, wait, I can't do this because of this. And yes, I think, yeah, having a little bit of like grace for ourselves in the beginning of that time is really important.
Right. So what you're talking about is how at the end of the year, Mercury is about to go retrograde. I think it's the 29th of December. Mercury's going to retrograde and Mars is still retrograde. So those two things change directions. Mars stations direct January 12th,
Hmm.
and Mercury stations direct January 18th. That is when we get it all going in the same direction. At the end of January, we're like, we've got Jupiter in Aries, Mars direct, Mercury direct. Things start to just kind of move forward. Right. Another thing I want to think about with Jupiter being in Taurus is that it's going to coexist with Uranus in Taurus. They won't come into a conjunction until 2024, but Uranus has been in Taurus. I was going to look this up since
2018?
2018. Thank you for that. Since 2018. And it's been fits and starts. One of the reasons, the revolution of Uranus and Taurus, is that Saturn has been squaring that Uranus, and they've just been like at loggerheads. Saturn has moved off of that square. Jupiter is going to coexist with Taurus. I believe that the things we expect from Uranus and Taurus, the revolution of our values, a new point of view around our relationship to Earth, and revolutionizing of economic systems, it's going to just like be a lot more on
See,
track.
I'm still concerned about the food shortages, and I think one of the symptoms of that Uranus and Taurus has been the food shortages, the medicine shortages,
It's why we need to change, right?
right,
Yeah.
right. But it's one of those, like, a lot of that stuff is tied up in ports.
Mhm.
Pisces.
Yeah, and like one of the things I noticed, so I went clothes shopping with my grandmother. This is a very short story. I went clothes shopping with my grandmother the other day, and the clothing store we were in was an absolute nonsense baby. Like, we were at Kohl's. I don't know if you went to Kohl's before the pandemic, but you could usually move the clothes around on the racks. There were so many clothes packed in onto these racks because shipments have been coming in. People aren't buying them. So I think it's that idea of like revolutionizing fast fashion, but also the abundance. Like, what are we doing with the abundance? What are we doing with like when things actually come in? I think you're right. Like it absolutely is going to be things.
Yeah.
Things are going to shift with Jupiter there, but I am worried that they might shift in a direction of scarcity.
Yeah, and that makes me think like not just with like the physical goods, but like workers and stores. I've definitely noticed that in stores lately, where It's like sometimes things are not as organized or they're more chaotic and there's like maybe not as many workers as there used to be. And maybe companies are getting more stingy or like not paying workers well enough. So I feel like, yeah, that's like some of that Uranus and Taurus too.
Right. What do we want to change about this? What is untenable? It's been untenable for a long time, of course, but there's just, it hasn't, momentum hasn't built. I think the union movement for unions and strikes is going to strengthen as well under this Jupiter going into Taurus. Um, I just feel like there is that kind of buildup. One of the Jupiter is going to make one sextile to Saturn while it's in Taurus, and that's going to be in June, and that also feels important. So that Saturn is in Pisces, Jupiter is in Taurus. Both of these are young. They're both inward moving, sort of settled, earthy and emotive and feeling kind of signs. And I think that's an encouragement of both of those things, being grounded and being connected to other people through our emotions. Oh, there's some, yeah. So Bonnie, you have your moon in Taurus sextile Jupiter in Pisces.
Yeah, it's an exact sextile too. See, I love them. I'm like, oh, I get to experience this through a transit.
So that feels good. So another ingress that's happening is that the nodes are changing signs. Um, the nodes have been, the North Node and South Node are always opposite each other. And the North Node's been in Taurus, with the South Node also being in Scorpio since January of this year, 2022. And they stay in a pair of signs for 18 months and are roughly 18 months. And so the nodes are going to enter the Aries Libra axis in July of this year, of 2023. And so the nodes are about eclipses. That's where the eclipses generally happen in signs around the nodes. So we've been having nodes in the sign, eclipses in the signs of Taurus and Scorpio. We've had some pretty intense eclipses, especially in 2022. And they're going to shift signs this next year in 2023. We're going to have some eclipses in the Aries Libra polarity and some in the Taurus Scorpio polarity. So we're in that kind of shifting back and forth phase with the eclipses. What do people think will be a shift in our experience with that?
I think for me, what I've seen in the greater collective is a lot of things around. I think too, getting the nodes off of your co-presence with Uranus will be good for the food insecurity. But I think what I've seen in the collective and in my personal life, the nodes like affected career stuff for me in a big way just because of their placement in my chart. I think moving into a new cycle will be and I think it'll call into that balance piece that Libra brings with the South Node of like what needs balanced. And if it's gonna try, trine Pluto by sign at least, and eventually it's gonna be in co-presence with Saturn in what's the word I'm looking for? Aries. That'll be interesting over the next 18 months to see what those are. I'm going to go off camera because I have 2 dogs acting the fool in here. So I'll be right back.
Okay. Yeah, there's a difference between the North Node and the South Node, and there are different points of view, philosophies about what the nodes mean. For myself, I have a kind of a framework of a North Node being my growing edge, and the South Node being what I'm leaving behind or letting go of or transforming. And those are really simplistic ways because it's not a binary. They need each other, and we kind of go back and forth. But yeah, there's something about, and the nodes move backwards, as you may have noticed. They move from Taurus to Aries, as the North Node shifts from Taurus to Aries, which signs are Aries precedes Taurus. So yeah, there's something about that that growing edge of like, what do I value in Taurus? What is sustainable? What is sustainable? What is kind of like earth centered and affirming of life. And then it goes into Aries, which is what do I need to take risks around? What do I need to initiate? So, what do you think, Bonnie, about these nodes changing and what we might think about those?
Yeah, I welcome it. I feel like the shift in energy is needed with Scorpio and Taurus, and having Uranus, with the North Node in Taurus. I feel like there's been a feeling of kind of stuckness because they're fixed signs. And it's definitely been exposing a lot of things like the like Scorpio South Node and the feeling of like decay and death and wanting to, I feel like with the Taurus North Node, it's about moving towards like, how do we make life more sustainable? So it's been very important. But with Aries and Libra, that shift, I feel like there's gonna be a lot more movement and like, forward direction, cardinal signs, especially with the Aries North Node, kind of like blazing a trail. So yeah, it just makes me think of like moving out of that stuckness, and also with Jupiter and Aries kind of giving us a highlight of that energy of like, how can we push forward with more momentum,
Yeah.
and in a more social way too, because it's fire and air signs, like leadership, togetherness, how we're moving forward with other people and taking risks.
Yeah. The eclipses, just to let people know, will happen in the solar eclipse. The first solar eclipse of the year will be April 19th, and that's going to be at 29 degrees Aries, which is that's a potent degree. It's the last degree of a sign. Jupiter will be nearby. It'll be at 23 degrees Aries. So there's that Jupiter sort of intensifier there. The next lunar eclipse will be in May 5th, and that's going to go back to Scorpio. Uranus will be really close to that one. Uranus will be at 18 degrees Taurus, and the lunar eclipse will be at 14 degrees Taurus or Scorpio. And then the next set of eclipses will be in October. October 12th will be a solar eclipse at 21 degrees Libra. And then the lunar eclipse will be October 28th. That will be another Taurus eclipse. And then Jupiter will be nearby that. So Jupiter is sort of like sneaking in, and Uranus is sneaking in to, color these eclipses. And we'll keep those in mind. So one of the big things that's happening this year is that Venus is stationing retrograde. Do you want to talk about that, Bonnie? What do you think about this Venus retrograde that's going to happen?
Yeah, this is going to be when Pluto is in Aquarius too, right?
Let's see. I wasn't
So I
thinking
should I
about
should have
that
looked at the,
because I think Pluto will be in Aquarius in March, and it
yeah.
goes
Okay.
back in July, I believe.
Yeah, so this Venus retrograde in Leo will have Pluto and Aquarius opposing. Um,
June.
yeah, I'm thinking with it being Venus and Leo, I'm thinking about like how we're going to go back and look at our values with how we're showing our authentic selves, and like what does that mean? And with Pluto and Aquarius being there, I'm also thinking about that tension between like our personal authentic selves and our personal values, and like how we want to show up as an individual versus like how we show up for the collective. So I feel like there might be some really important tension there at play with this retrograde,
Hmm.
and going back and examining those things, and Pluto being Pluto kind of yeah, egging Venus on, because the last Venus retrograde in Capricorn was with like was like conjunct Pluto. So this will be very different. It'll be opposing Pluto.
Mhm. Yeah, the last time that Venus retrograded in Leo was 2015. I don't know. And so you just like the Mars retrograde, extending the length of time that Mars was in one sign, Venus retrograde extends the time that Venus is in one sign, and it'll be in Leo for 4 months as opposed to 1 month or less that it usually is in a sign. So that's when you're talking about the individuality and the personal expression, because that's kind of a Leo quality, right? That's what we might be thinking about. We might be thinking about how what are my gifts? What are my things that I want to bring into the world and be and contribute to the world? I don't know. Yeah, so this Venus retrograde kind of is a part of a big cycle where Venus, is either a morning star or evening star, and Venus retrogrades happen when Venus is an evening star, and Venus has just become an evening star just recently. So that means after sunset, if you've got a good view of the horizon, you'll see Venus shining over there in the west after sunset. And it's going to continue to rise in the sky after sunset until June 4th, when it reaches what it's called greatest elongation. And then it's going to start to disappear from the sky and will be gone by July. So Venus gets into Leo in June, the beginning of June, and it enters that pre-shadow period where it's going to be going through the retrograde zone for the first time, beginning June 18th. And then it's going to station retrograde July 22nd. Venus and the Sun will come into conjunction or cazimi in August 18th. And then that means that Venus has gone all the way from evening star to morning star. And now it's going to be morning star around the end of August. We will see it as a morning star. And that's sort of like the big transition that Venus does during a Venus retrograde. It goes from evening star to morning star. It'll station direct in September. It's still in Leo. And then the Venus shadow completes in October. So we have something that's basically going from June until October, this Venus and Leo, this sort of like big, movement from evening star to morning star. And there are some signature transits, like what I call signature transits are when a retrograde planet will make an aspect to another planet 3 times because it's going direct, retrograde, and direct again. And so the ones that stand out for Venus is that Venus is going to square Jupiter 3 times. And Venus is also going to square Uranus because both Jupiter and Uranus are in Taurus, which is a sign that's square to Leo. So that kind of adds more to the story. What do you think we could anticipate from Venus getting into all of that Jupiter-Uranus action during this time?
So I'm thinking about how Inanna is tied to Venus, and it's the
Yes.
descent of Inanna into the underworld.
Mhm.
And when Venus disappears, right, that is the descent portion, and then the emergence later is the coming out of the underworld. And so when it gets, when it's challenged, I think of it as almost like, what are the challenges at the gates that Inanna faces? If it's squaring those planet, that's six gates for Venus to go through.
Mm.
No, 3 times 9,
Mhm.
right? No, 2 times 3 is 9.
Well, yeah, no, 2 times 3 is
3
7.
each. It's 3 each.
Yeah, 3
It's
each
not
of
3
those.
planets. I can do math. It's not like astrology is just crazy circular math. Um, so that's six times it gets to be, this planet of values and beauty gets to be asked and challenged, which I think is, really, it's an initiation for Inanna. It's an initiation for us to be able to look at those.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think the tension for Leo and Taurus, being both fixed signs, but very different elements and modalities, one being more extroverted, fire sign, and one being more introverted, an earth sign, is maybe around like speaking up and being like really bold about what we need to change. And Uranus and Taurus has been showing us like what has not been sustainable in very like earthy physical ways, but it's a Taurus is like a more introverted, more quiet sign. So maybe there's some ways that Venus in Leo going through this like retrograde journey is teaching us or showing us how to be more bold and outspoken and fierce about what we need to change. And maybe that's uncomfortable, but necessary for this transit for Uranus and Taurus, and also Jupiter and Taurus.
I'm
Yeah,
also
that
thinking about
makes
how
sense.
Leo is such a like a regal sign, like that
Yes.
that nobility of Leo.
Yeah, and also like how these with Uranus and Taurus, like these big collective things, like how Venus and Leo is showing us like our own personal, like individual pride, and also Pluto and Aquarius is getting mixed in with that, like how the social interacts with the personal, but like how we're standing up for our individual pride and how that interacts with the collective.
Love that.
Lessons about pride, lessons about nobility, lessons about being fiery and yeah, standing up for things. That makes a lot of sense. I'm also just like realizing that Venus rules Taurus. So those planets in Taurus that Venus is squaring, there is a little bit of that. I want to help you. I'm helping you.
Yeah,
I'm helping you by challenging you.
yeah, there's some communication there. It's not easy communication, but there's some flow there.
Yeah, right. So that's another oomph to, I think, the Uranus and Taurus situation. What we can expect from Uranus and Taurus this year. Yeah. Well, we thought we would begin talking about each month, and we're not going to go into huge detail about what each month will bring, but just give us some brainstorm some keywords about the month. Our intention with all of this exploration and kind of like assessing the year is what kind of personal magic do we want to do, what kind of collective magic do we want to do. It is a lot about magic. It is a lot about personal development and empowerment, collective empowerment. So what as we look at January, one of the things that stands out for me is, I mentioned before, we have Mars stationing direct, we have Mercury stationing direct, and we also have Uranus stationing direct. We also have the other planets that we think about, Saturn and Pluto, are moving through the new areas of the zodiac they haven't been in before. So the keyword I think of is like full steam ahead, not right away, but by the end of the month, it's like we're moving forward. What do you think with all that? What's the keyword?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
Oh yeah, I like that. And also with Jupiter and Aries, yeah, yeah, I think it's like, yeah, like we were talking about before, it's like that stumbling around, but then you're gaining your footing. So full steam ahead, and it may be kind of wobbly at first.
Wobbly, wobbly at first, getting our feet under us,
Yeah.
move ahead.
Yeah. Notice
Get
change,
ready
momentum
because a
build.
lot's going to happen in March. So it's a little bit like, you know, get ready and wait for getting ready. Yeah. And then in February, there is not as much happening. We've got a conjunction of Venus and Neptune in Pisces, but then Venus also pretty soon after that goes into Aries, kind of coexists with um, Jupiter. And then in March, at the very first of March, Venus is going to conjoin Jupiter. But there's already this kind of Jupiter energy growing. Somebody said in the chat, Jupiter in her Aries feels very go and very grow. Jupiter in Aries is like the Kool-Aid man crashing through your house.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah, it can be.
the keywords I have for February are contemplate and prepare.
Contemplate and prepare.
Mhm.
Yeah. Maybe also fun. Like maybe we can have fun.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Yeah, like gaining confidence through that stumbling around and going, like getting some more momentum, like, oh, I can do this.
Yeah, confidence. Well, one of the things that's happening February 16th is that the sun is going to conjoin Saturn, and that's the last time the sun will be conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. So there's a little bit of illumination of what has that Saturn in Aquarius been about, because Saturn's just about to leave that sign. So that's also a part of February that stands out.
Mhm.
Yeah. So March is the month that we've just like everything happens.
I can go first. I have
Okay.
accept where you are.
What did you say?
Accept where you are.
Accept where you are and open to the new.
Nexus point.
Hmm. Yeah, we have Mars leaves its shadow zone. We've got Saturn going into Pisces March 7th. We have Pluto going into Aquarius March 23rd. Um, yeah,
The
the
first of two Aries new moons.
we have two new moons in Aries, right? Well, the first of two, yeah. April
Right.
will
It's
be
the
the
first of
second,
two Aries. Yeah.
right? So this, do you have any keywords about this? Venus is going to go into Taurus in this month.
Yeah, I think this month will be the word I was thinking of was eye-opening and like shifting values. Like we've spent some time like moving forward, but we have these big changes and it's like, oh, we need to reevaluate like how we're moving forward.
Reevaluate is a great way to think about that. I think some events will happen, world events, where we will need to respond in a new way. I think that's sort of what's coming.
Adaption.
Adapt, yeah, adapt and initiate. When I think about Aquarius and Pisces, where the new energy is coming from, neither of those are cardinal signs, though we do have Jupiter in cardinal. But there's all of them, all of the modalities. We got a little bit of cardinal, take action, a little bit of fixed, like hold it down, and a little bit of mutable, which is shift and change and adapt. So we'll be doing all of it in March. Yeah, and then April. In April, we are going to begin our eclipse. We're going to have an eclipse season that begins in April, the middle of April. There'll be a solar eclipse, which is that second Aquarius moon that you talked about, or Aries moon, I'm sorry, that you talked about. We have two Aries moons back to back. Mercury's going to go retrograde again. Pluto is going to station, well, that's in May. So, yeah, we have the beginning of eclipse season and a Mercury eclipse that's going to happen. What do you think April is going to be like? Also, April has the conjunction of the sun and Jupiter in Aries. So, that is it feels like a lot of Aries, but then because there's an eclipse in Aries, it's the unseen part or the surprising part of Aries, like things ending and beginning suddenly. Maybe something that we began, we had all this initiative to go forward, and then an eclipse happens, and we got to reevaluate that and begin again and again. So we may have more than one beginning, like.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
what I was thinking too, especially because it's the last eclipse with the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio. It's like looking at some of the past things we were working on, but with like fresh eyes, like a new perspective, and having to change the plan and move forward again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my keywords are digest and absorb. Like a lot happened, and then there's like the eclipses are gonna happen, but it's an opportunity to engage in that digestion process.
Okay. Yeah. Um, Especially I think May, also that absorbing time. We're going to have a lunar eclipse in Scorpio. Um, so that is that composting, metabolizing energy. Um, so if we're not absorbing in April, then I think we probably are moving towards that in May of, okay, maybe I had some setbacks. Maybe I began something and then had to reorient and begin again. And what am I processing around that with another eclipse? Any other
Mm.
things about that?
Yeah, it also feels like saying goodbye because of the South Node in Scorpio and at the last lunar eclipse in Scorpio. It's like, what are those final remnants of Scorpio, that like the parts that we need to say goodbye to? Not all of it, but like the parts that we are making peace with and letting go of.
That's a great insight. Yeah, we're saying goodbye to the Scorpio eclipse, right? And then we'll have another full moon or lunar eclipse in Taurus in October, and then we're done with that polarity, right? So this is that final South Node lunar eclipse in Scorpio. Yeah. So it May also has some Mars transits in it. So we haven't talked about that, but Mars is going to oppose Pluto May 20th. It's going to square Jupiter May 23rd, and it's going to square the nodes May 26th. So there's some Mars. Mars will be in Leo, the sign that Venus will retrograde through later in the year. So there is some dynamic tension and possibly some explosions of some sort or some revelations. Mars opposing Pluto is a big deal because I think if we don't notice something about Pluto ingress in March, I think we're definitely going to notice something about it in May. May is going to be when the Pluto ingress into Aquarius really kind of hits. Like, this is different. Yeah. And at the same time, Jupiter will go into Taurus and will just be in that, Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, T-square, the beginning of the fixed sign. So the end of May is pretty dynamic, and May might be one of our harder months because there's an eclipse that month as well.
Yeah, and I think especially if we don't make peace with what we're letting go of, Mars and Leo is going to show us like, hey, you need to work on this. And Pluto and Aquarius.
Yeah.
I think if you don't let go, it will be let go for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It'll be set on fire.
Yeah. I hope not.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But that is a good point though. Mars and Leo before the Venus retrograde in Leo, it's maybe there's like a bit of an explosion, and that leads the way for Venus and Leo, giving us more like love and caring as we like re-examine some of these things that are exploding.
Yeah.
Trying to think of a better way to describe it.
Does Venus conjoin Mars and Leo, or does Mars? Does Venus conjoin Mars and Leo? I don't have the ephemeris in front of me.
Okay. Venus and Mars do not.
Yeah.
Right. So then we have June, which notably Pluto goes back into Capricorn, June 11th. So we had that first dip into Aquarius. Now we're back into Capricorn. Is there more for Pluto to do in Capricorn? Of course there is. And that, yeah. So there will be that sort of like metabolizing toxic power and systems of Capricorn. So it could be a very healing time as Pluto goes back, every time Pluto goes back into Capricorn, we have an opportunity to complete some work that we haven't finished yet. Yeah. Also in June, the Venus pre-shadow, pre-retrograde shadow begins June 18th. Saturn stations retrograde. Mars squares Uranus. So there's a lot in this month too. And I think with that Saturn going retrograde, Pluto going back into Capricorn, it's just a little bit of like, let's pull back. The previous month might have been a lot, and we're pulling back and conserving and, kind of maybe even protecting ourselves some. So protection might be a word.
So I was originally thinking be tender, but I think I actually want to change that to open, gentle heart, big fucking fence, which is a Danielle Laporte quote. But I love it.
Could you say that again?
Open, gentle heart, big fucking fence.
I love that. Yeah. Especially for Venus retrograde in Leo, because Leo is about the heart and opening it up. But retrograde is like, hold on, like after that Mars in Leo and that fire and like getting burnt, it's like I need a minute.
Mm-hmm. So in July is when we have that first Venus square Uranus transit, the beginning part of July. We also have Venus stationing retrograde at the end of July, or July 22nd. So that whole retrograde journey begins. At the same time, we have Pluto squaring the nodes, and a square to the nodes can trigger sort of eclipse-like things as well. So that feels like if there's more, this will be a healing time for Pluto Capricorn healing. This will be a time for Pluto Capricorn healing to happen. Yeah, so Venus goes retrograde in July.
Yeah, it's almost like Pluto is giving Venus some time and yeah, going back to do like unfinished work and healing that we missed this last time around. Yeah, but that's really interesting about Pluto squaring the nodes. It seems like, oh, there's something really dynamic here that needs to be exposed again.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I also didn't say that the nodes shift into Aries, Libra in July as well. So July is
Yeah.
a lot going on with the node shifting, Venus retrograde. Yeah, there's some deeper work that's happening. And I think with that Pluto squaring the nodes, just as the nodes switch polarities, there is probably something that happens that gives us some definition of what that is about, what the Aries Libra nodal eclipse cycle will be about.
Mm-hmm. And Snow said that Chiron goes retrograde in Aries in July too. So adding that with the nodes and Pluto, it seems like an intense healing period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
got nothing to add. It's beautiful.
Okay. So in August, we have
Leo season.
we have Leo season. We have the Sun conjoins Venus in that cazimi, that retrograde, and that is a download. I always think of those retrograde conjunctions with the Sun as this a download of what we need to know, and it's kind of a blessing time. It's kind of a gift to us, and around the degree of 20-degree Leo. So it's Venus's gift, Venus's Leo gift, our own nobility, our own pride, our own gifts that we have to give to the world.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe stepping into our pride more, learning how to do that after this intense healing period.
Mm-hmm. Step into our pride and our dignity. Yeah, like that's another word I love for Leo.
Yeah, I wrote down initiate earlier as part of that cycle. Um, and I think the Kazemi is like at that energy surge into that initiation.
Yes, right. That is almost the point of it, the the culmination of it. Um, yeah, so then we go to September. Venus is going to station direct at the beginning of September. Jupiter is going to station retrograde in Taurus. And we also have, a Mercury retrograde that's happening. And I think the major piece, though, of this is that Venus stationing direct and Jupiter stationing retrograde. So Jupiter goes all the way to 15 Taurus, and now it's going to go retrograde for a while. Um, this doesn't feel like a big thing. Like, I think like May and June, which feels like big months. This almost feels like that Libra kind of rebalancing time.
It feels like
Thank God.
integration. Yeah, I was just gonna say reintegration or integration of all that energy.
Yeah.
That Venus initiation, that those big things that happened earlier in the summer. With this being at the end of summer, being able to like really harvest that
Harvest the
energy.
balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we need that. Like we can't have an intense month every month. No, yeah, we need some integration and balancing.
Yes.
Yeah, and Jupiter going retrograde with yeah, it just also makes me think just like a reevaluation of what we've been experiencing with Uranus and Taurus. Like
Mhm.
like maybe there's some things that we can re-examine, like maybe there's some opportunities we missed.
Yes. Yes, of course. Yeah. Hmm. So October, we're going to have more eclipses coming towards the mid to late October. Mars kind of begins that in the beginning of October by opposing the North Node. So that means it will be conjoining the South Node and squaring Pluto in the first part of October. So October is kind of eclipsy again. It's about evolution. It's about like, what do I need to let go of? What do I need to move towards? Making like either we make conscious choices to change or life just gives us change, like change happens during the eclipse cycle, sets us on a new path. So that feels like October is about new path. It is the lunar eclipse that happens towards the end of October will be our last Taurus eclipse, just like you mentioned previously about Scorpio. So at the same time, on the same day of that lunar eclipse, Mars is going to oppose Jupiter in Taurus. So there is like this Taurus Scorpio emphasis in October, which October for me is always about Scorpio and Taurus anyway. It's always about the death and the rebirth energy. So that will be very prominent in October, death and rebirth energy.
Yeah, it's spooky season.
Spooky season. Yeah. That's about what I have to say about that. Anyone have anything else?
Like you nailed it.
Yeah. So that happens. So eclipse season is over. Then we have November, where we have Saturn is going to station direct again at 0 degrees Pisces. So it's been retrograding for a few months. We have Mars opposing Uranus, which is always some dynamic kind of energy. We also have the Sun conjoining Mars. So Mars Sun conjunction happens every 2 years, and it's an initiation of a new phase. a 2-year phase for Mars. So that is in the sign of Scorpio, which Mars rules. So, um, yeah, I think this month, November, is calmer than October, but still with all this Mars and Scorpio energy, it's still, it's digging in there. It's turning over the compost pile.
Yeah, it's doing the detective work. It's not like
Yeah.
an explosion like Mars and Leo was. It's more like we have to dig deeper.
Mhm. Yeah. And that feels okay. That feels right. The Right at the end of November, Mars in Sagittarius will square Saturn in Pisces. Those are the two malefic planets squaring each other. That can always, stir up some tension in the beginning of those mutable signs. So, um, it's just my mind went to religious war. I don't, I mean, it might literally be something like that because both of those signs are about religion and belief. And Mars about war. So,
It'll be right after the election. I'm like
what?
doing math of like when's the next presidential election. I think it'll be, I mean, that's when people generally announce candidacy. So I think it'll be interesting to see
Mm,
who's coming out in both parties.
Mhm. Yeah,
mhm.
Sorry for our friends across the pond being super US focused.
yeah, I know. That's true. Um,
But when you live in it, it's
I So yeah,
um,
that there's some tension. It's not a long-term influence, Mars square Saturn, but it is a blip in things, and it might indicate some tensions around belief. Um,
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's kind of starting off that like Saturn is going to be in Pisces for a while. So it's kind of so we're starting it off with this like rough patch, but
yeah.
that maybe that's where Saturn starts to get some more ideas.
mm,
Yeah, so December, I am noticing it's the Mars influence is that Mars will be squaring Neptune at the end of December, and that's more of the Sagittarius Pisces influence, those two signs kind of butting heads. It signals some confusion, but I don't think that that is like the whole meaning of this month. I think also Neptune is stationing direct earlier in December, December 6th. So there is, because Neptune is in Pisces, Saturn is in Pisces, there feels like some some of what we are meant to experience about Saturn being in Pisces is like returning to awareness. And it's like the good side of Pisces and the shadow side of Pisces. Um, all of that feels like it's kind of coming out in the last 2 months and in December too. I think the good side of Pisces is that recognition that we need each other, that this isolation or a feeling of individuality is not serving us. And yeah, so that's how I see that energy, that Pisces energy, kind of calling us into more connection. Any other last final Pisces thoughts of what we might feel at the end of the year around Pisces? And
Just with the Mars and Sag like squaring the Pisces placements, I feel like even though like in traditional astrology they have the same planetary ruler Jupiter, it can both be about like ideals and wisdom. They approach it in very different ways. And I feel like Mars and Sag just kind of try to like light a fire under those placements in Pisces of like, oh, you're dreaming about this, like why not do it? So there's that tension of like, don't just sit around and dream, but also just like do it.
yeah. Mm, right. So don't fall into the idea that we can just think our way or feel our way into solutions, but we need to
Mhm.
act and be
Yeah.
proactive. So
Yeah.
balance the feelings with action.
Hmm.
That makes
But we
sense.
also need to have the feelings too. That's where the tension is. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is a quick overview, or maybe not so quick. Feels like a whirlwind to me, though, of 2023. I'm wondering if we want to have some final thoughts about this year, what we are thinking about on our own personal magic, what what are our intentions for this year? Mhm.
I,
It's a
I don't
big
know. I gotta get a new job, so
question. Right.
that's kind of my focus right now. Like I said, the last couple of eclipses had some big movements there for me, so I'm looking forward to whatever's coming along on my 10th house to
Mhm.
do its thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me and Hemlock, the nodes in Aries and Libra are nodal returns. So that will be fun. For me, it will be career and house. So I'll be going through what you're going through, Hemlock.
Maybe, I mean, I think ultimately it's a good thing for
Yeah.
me, what happened, even if it was difficult. I think too, um, what I want my magic to focus on is being really present, um, with anything that I'm with, whether it be, career or family or the magic that I'm doing in that moment. I think presence is going to be, and that mindfulness of being in that present moment is going to be so potent, for
Mm.
this year, as and watching, sitting and watching and seeing how the energy plays out, without moving on it immediately.
Mm. Yeah, I want to take the direction of Saturn in Pisces to help me navigate what I see in myself in the world that Pluto and Aquarius will bring. Like move towards others, move towards connection. I just heard someone define compassion as love staying with or meeting suffering. So when we see suffering, do we turn away? Do we
Mm.
feel overwhelmed? Or can we just be with? That's kind of going back to your presence, I think, Hemlock, is just being present. So, how do I develop compassion in the face of these new shifts? So, that's what I'm going to work on too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is it for us. We went a little bit over, but I really appreciated talking to you, Bonnie and Hemlock. And I'm not noticing questions. We had some great comments and really appreciate people showing up. I hope you have a great 2023, everyone.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you. And I appreciate everyone's like what they shared in the comments and their perspectives.
Yeah.
Me too. Thank you so much. This will come out as a recording. We'll hopefully get you a supplemental document too. Might be a little bit for that because we got a lot more to add than I thought we might. So it'll be good. But then you'll have both the recording to look back on and something to have in hand as well, which we're pretty excited to offer you all.
Yes. Well, good night.
Good night. Hopefully